Today, we are getting into exposing some nutrition myths. And last time, what was it, 2 weeks ago now, we started strong with our fat loss myths. And if you were available for that session, or if you caught up on that session, I'm sure you probably found it quite useful. I mean, we did run over, me and Marvin have a habit of doing that because there's just so much to get into and also a lot of questions. I think there was many questions off of that first one, and I'm sure we'll have the same here, right? Because this is about really challenging some of the information, misinformation, depending how you look at it, as to what we think we know about nutrition. And I know a lot of you actually shared some of the sort of thoughts or things that have been on your minds over the years around sort of myths or things that you've heard which maybe don't add up in terms of nutrition. So once again, obviously, these presentations are all the more better when we have your input so we can really sort of focus on the things that are top of mind for you. And I think we're enjoying, myself and Marvin, having the polls, right? Having the polls where you get to input and you get to choose what we're going to talk about next. So, as always, if there are any topics that you want us to delve into in the future, please do just shout, as I think these are invaluable, obviously, because people keep coming back. So, that is a good sign. And we really do appreciate you taking the time every 2 weeks, every Tuesday to join these sessions and really level up your thinking, leveling up your implementation as well. So going back to some of what has been shared in the sort of the meeting invitation, right? I asked you what are some of the myths that you've potentially heard over the years, and a lot of it is like, you can't eat this, you can't eat that. I think with social media, everyone seems to be in a supermarket holding some sort of produce and saying that this produce is going to kill you. This produce is making you fat. And I think it's very confusing because at the end of the day, you feel like you just can't eat anything. And as with most things, there is a rationale behind, some of this thinking. Maybe it's faulty, maybe it's justified. And I think we want to get into some of the most pervasive myths that we've sort of seen. And if there is anything, opinion, thoughts, sort of reflections that you may have as we go through this, please do just write in the chat box because obviously myself and Marvin are tag teaming this. So whilst one speaks, the other one will be in the messages. And if there is a bigger talking point about it, then obviously we can get into it on this call. But I think a lot of the questions that we had was just around like calories, does this make you fat? Some in relation to health and disease, which obviously we'll get into as well. And I think what we'll do is we'll recap on these at the end to see if there's any that we haven't sort of missed off the list. Anything to add on these, Marvin, before we dive right in?
Let's get into it. These are some really good ones. Looking forward to this one indeed. So we'll kick off with the first one. Healthy foods can be eaten in unlimited amounts, right? Because healthy foods don't have calories. That's the first myth that we're tackling. What we often then see as a result of this myth is that people end up snacking on nuts, dates, granola, quote unquote healthy desserts throughout the day, assuming that they don't count towards total calorie consumption. And this obviously comes from, the rise of clean eating culture, right? Social media would have made a really big dent in that, sort of as Pete has mentioned, right? If you are not allowed to eat things that have all these labels and ingredients on them, then surely you can have as many nuts and dates as you like. The labeling of foods as good versus bad, marketing of natural, organic, no added sugar, like all of this makes you just think, okay, so I should only eat food that is not coming out of a packet, and I can have as much of it as I can possibly consume. And so we see that sort of tends to then be the mental or the process, right? The thinking. But why is that a myth? This is because calories still matter, right? Regardless of food quality. So overeating these calorie dense foods, these quote unquote healthy foods, can actually prevent fat loss or lead to weight gain. Just because it's deemed healthy doesn't actually mean it's low calorie, right? Especially when you think about the things that then tend to be snacked on, things like nuts and those types of things where they are very, very calorie dense, not bad, but they're just very calorie dense. And so you want to be making sure that your portion awareness is really, really important. That's one of the solutions, right? We want to include these things in our diets, right? Because these things they're good for us. We need fats, we need these nutrients and these minerals and these nutrient dense foods, but we want to build our meals around protein, fiber, fruits, vegetables for satiety without excluding these foods, but without also over consuming these types of foods.
Yeah, and I think there's a good sort of point I want to raise here, or two actually. And one of these sort of instances has always stuck in my mind, right? When I first moved to Saudi and was coaching a guy called Lawai. Lawai, this is Marvin, the guy who's sort of now 5 weeks in with us, right? And this is way back when. So this is like 6, 7 years ago. And we're kind of smashing his training, right, in the gym. And he's on this kind of, he's following these principles and following this plan in terms of nutrition. And I remember we're walking outside around the track one day, and I'm really trying to dig into it because it's like, man, you're eating this, you're doing this, and you're not losing weight. I don't get it. And it was kind of like a situation of, why is that everything? Like there's nothing else creeping in. And he's like, oh yeah, I kind of when I'm at my desk, I sort of have some nuts. And it turns out he's eating, a packet of nuts a day when he's in the office, right? When he's grazing. And it comes to the point, as Marvin was saying, like healthy, nutritious food still has calories, right? And there's that sometimes the disconnect between, okay, to lose weight or to lose fat, you need this calorie deficit, right? And just because something is healthy or it's nutritious or it's got good fats in and all this kind of stuff, it still means it has calories. And so the point I really want to mention here, and again, we see this sometimes with some food journals, right? Or the lack of food journals in this case, where people, input their meals, right? Their meals, their snacks, their this, their that. But they sort of ignore or forget certain things that are creeping into their day. Maybe like, the spoonful of honey in the morning, right? Very nutritious, this and that, lots of vitamins, lots of nutrients, but still, it's essentially like pure natural sugar. It's still sugar, it still has calories. The same things for nuts, right? Healthy granolas, which come on your Greek yogurt and these sorts of things. And so, whilst, we're not saying anything is bad, right? It could be, or these little things going on during the day could be the thing that shift you from being in a fat loss stage, a calorie deficit, to either being at maintenance or even in a calorie surplus. So everything that you eat has calories attached to it. It doesn't matter if you don't know what the calories are, but it's just being aware of, even though this is healthy, it's a healthy dessert, it's got no added sugar, whatever, it still adds to the total calorie number during the day.
Nice. And just to add to that as well, when you think of, because I know we often talk about fat loss, fat loss, fat loss, but when you're in a maintenance phase or trying to build, right? If we're reverse dieting and starting to build up the metabolism again, these could actually be a tool that you use, right? So you could actually turn to nuts, obviously not in copious amounts, right? But instead of, increasing or adding a whole new meal to your daily routine, it could just be, half a palm of nuts or something like that, that then increases the total calories without you actually, feeling that satiation that you would if you were having a whole meal. Next one is organic equals healthier and more nutritious. Now, this is really interesting. I've had many a conversation with clients around this, with the thinking that because it's organic, again, it's healthier, right? The name organic plastered all over, the food that they eat, whether it's packaged or unpackaged, therefore it's healthier. And there's this perception that it is healthier, right? And so we see people opting out of buying regular fruits just because the organic section is out. There's not enough stock anymore. Or skipping completely just because there's perceived quality or it's perceived that the quality is lower because it's not organic, right? And this often comes from that perception that organic is clean, it's natural, it's chemical free, it's pesticide free, and that sort of notion of all those things being bad. And if it's organic, then it's good, it doesn't have all those things. But the truth is, right, or the reason why this is a myth is because, the nutritional differences between organic and non-organic are actually pretty minimal, right? The organic produce, non-organic produce actually has pesticides, right? The one that people are trying to avoid, like, oh, no pesticides, organic doesn't have pesticides, but organic has pesticides, just different kinds of pesticides, right? And the ones that do have pesticides, the non-organic, go through very, very rigorous testing. So you can be sure that this food is safe for you to eat, right? And then we have the organic ultra processed foods, right? The snacks, the chips, the this, the that. I mean, same sort of notion, right? Where people think it's healthy, it's organic, therefore it doesn't have as much calories, therefore I can have as much as I want. That's the continuous, like, perceived value of organic. Well, what we want to do is we want to prioritize, diet quality over these labels. We want to wash our produce properly, regardless of organic or not. You want to spend more effort on consistency over this, like, perfection and nitpicking these little things, right? How many times have we kind of had this discussion before with people that want to prioritize the organic produce, but then aren't willing to get their steps in, for example, right? Like, you want to be the whole process of getting healthier, getting fitter, getting stronger is holistic, right? And so we can't be just dying on the hill of I only eat organic food, but then it's not all encompassing. What about everything else? What about your sleep? What about this? What about that? So it's majoring in the minors, right? If you will, is a good sort of thing to think about. And then, of course, the financial aspect, right? Organic is expensive. And oftentimes you've got to think, is it really worth it to go organic? And oftentimes I would argue that it's not. Nate, what do you recommend?
Have you taken a trip to Nawa Foods in Jeddah on
Of
Stars
course,
Avenue?
yeah, I mean, I love these places too. It is. It's like a kid in a candy store for me.
But yeah, like the price attached to some of these things is crazy.
Yeah.
And I think it gives people or brands a sort of an opportunity to market their products in such a way and to attach a higher price point to it. And I remember, like, having worked in marketing through my 20s, right? You would literally create stamps like this as a kind of, a way to appeal to the consumer, right? I remember this one example. The kind of the brand was like Nutri-Grain, and it was one of these kind of Nature Valley type bars, right? Lots of sugar in it, and it tastes good, and it had these like raisins basically in it, right? Sultana's raisins. And as part of like the marketing on the packet, right, there was this big push in the UK around like you need 5 servings of fruit and veg a day. And the label on it was one of your 5 a day. And you're basically eating like a 30 grams of sugar, a high calorie snack bar, which, supposedly has one of your 5 a day because it's got, I don't know, 10 raisins in it. And I think we all need to be better at discerning like the marketing from the truth and really understanding by looking at the labels, by doing our own research, and not just being sold to by, the powerful marketers who are literally prioritizing every little centimeter on the packet of whatever to make you buy it, even down to colorways, imagery, this kind of stuff to, in this case, it's Q organic in that way.
Yeah, it's just really interesting, right? If you follow the money, you'll kind of see why some of these things are done, right? Because at the end of the day, bottom line is what matters most. Listen, we're not saying organic is bad, but on your order of priorities, right, you aren't going to be reaching for organic fruit before you just, walk or just have fruit overall. Next one is eating every 2 to 3 hours to boost the metabolism or stoke the metabolic fire, if you will, which was quite a popular sort of term that was coined by bodybuilders. What we often see is people forcing snacks despite not being hungry, just to keep the metabolism alive, right? You got to keep it like a fire. And this is really interesting. It's like, I don't know if you guys have gone camping or ever been around a fire. And, obviously as the fire starts to die down, or you don't want the fire to die down, so you're constantly adding little bits of wood, little twigs, and that sort of stuff to keep the fire alive. And so the thought was that the more you continue to eat, right, smaller meals throughout the day or snacking throughout the day, you're keeping your body expending energy because it's constantly having to digest food, right? But lo and behold, we have an obesity, situation in the world today. And I don't think that all the food that all these people are eating is making them expend more calories. There's no metabolic fire keeping them healthy.
Yes, and I think with the like a lot of the fitness stuff which we see today, right, comes from old bodybuilding practices, right? Because bodybuilding back in the 70s, 80s, and onwards was like the main source of fitness information. It's what everyone should do. And so if you're, I don't know, an 100 kilo bodybuilder, right, for you to have 6 meals a day, that makes sense because you need to get that amount of volume in order to, grow the muscle that you want. And so for people who have lives and jobs and this kind of stuff, we've seen it a lot where trainers may say, okay, you need to eat 5 times a day, and it's just totally unrealistic for people who are living a normal life, right? And so a lot of the time, and I just sort of had a call with a lady called Danya, who I think is on a call as well now, but it sort of goes to the point that what works for you or what is sustainable for you is going to be the best thing for you to do, right? If you can only manage 2 meals a day and a snack, great. There's no point trying to force yourself to think, oh my God, how am I going to get 5 meals a day, 6 meals a day, spend the night in the kitchen, prep your meals for the next 3 days, and then within a week you've fallen off and you failed. So again, it's like what is going to be the most impactful thing for you at this moment in time, and then how can you look to build on that progressively, or sustain that as a habit and a practice, because that is the thing that is going to see the long-term success in all of this.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, Pete. There was someone that I don't remember who it was, but having a conversation with her earlier today or the day before yesterday around how there's a lot of very consistent snacking, right, in the food journal. So food comes in, and then an hour later there's something else, an hour later something else, an hour later something else. And upon kind of asking questions, right, you start to realize that this person was used to having worked with a dietitian who was, encouraging them to eat 5, 6 meals a day. And so now that's a habit for this person, right, where they're so used to consistently, eating, these small meals throughout the day. When in reality, what we actually want to focus on is that as case in point here, this is why this is a myth, that meal frequency has little to no impact on metabolism, right? When calories are equal. We want to constant eating can increase your total calorie intake unintentionally, right? Because then you're constantly eating food and you actually don't realize that the calories add up. And often it's snacking and not whole meals, and the snacks are calorie dense, right? So the solution is we want to make sure that we choose a frequency that suits your lifestyle, like Pete said, prioritizing total daily intake, right, and adherence. And your individual goals and individual schedule is what's most important to you because that's what you can stick to. So, everyone has their targets, whether it's 4 or 3 protein servings, fruits and vegetables as well. Rather stick to those and focus on that rather than, oh, I should snack, oh, I have to snack, I need to do that. And that sort of approach.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I think I've had this conversation about 5 times this week already, and it's always down to the cravings in the evening, right? These are things I just can't help, and I feel like I need this and this. And you then look at the food journal, and there's two sort of routes that come into play, right? And the best way to attack a craving is to kind of not let it happen in the first place. And two routes here. The individual doesn't eat or eats very, very little during the day. And then by the time they get home, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, they are like ravished, right? They're so hungry, cravings through the roof. The body is sending signals like feed me, feed me, feed me. And then it's always high calorie, high fat, high sugar type things, understandably, right? Because the body needs something. And so you can't fight against, the body's signals a lot of the time. Or the other option, which is kind of, or the other route which we see a lot of is, this kind of grazing through the day. So never actually reaching a level of like fullness, but instead like maybe having a croissant for breakfast, maybe then, a yogurt for lunch, maybe then a mid-afternoon, someone's brought a cake into work and you have a slice of cake. And so even though you've been eating during the day, you sort of have really never been reached that level of fullness, right? You've never been sufficiently fueled and nourished with whole foods, slower to digest foods that are going to really fill you up. So that again, in the evening, the cravings kick in because you've only just been serving kind of small, like rabbit food type portions, which then again, your body is going to be like, I need something substantial. And that is where then I don't know, the burger and fries comes in at 10 o'clock on a hunger station order from chefs.
Yeah,
As
I
good
mean,
as it is, as good as it is.
not knocking the burger. Yeah,
Mm.
I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have seen this, right? This like comparison type picture where you've got 1,500 or 2,000 calories from snacks, and then 2,000 calories from whole food. The 2,000 calories from whole food looks like food you like, a 100 kg man would really struggle to get through, right? Whereas, 2,000 calories of just snacks, you've got, big frappuccino from Starbucks, a Kit Kat and a croissant, and you've hit your 2,000 calories, right? And yet you're not full. So like Pete is saying, like you end up grazing and you have this, have that, have this, and then by the end of the day, it actually adds up all those total calories.
And so this is why like having a routine, having a structure, even though it may be a little bit boring or routine, is so useful when you are focusing on reaching a goal because you need those kind of guardrails in place of what you can do. Own your breakfast, own a lunch, own sort of a snack or small dinner in the evening, whatever it is that works for you and your schedule and your family situation and the housekeeper or whatever. Make it a routine because then as soon as you build that routine of predictability, you can then start tweaking and changing after seeing, the progress come through rather than just grazing one day, 3 meals the next day, nothing till dinner, 1 meal a day. And that is there where things get confusing and quite frustrating, I think, for yourself as well.
Oh, I thought 1 meal a day was the secret to fat loss. I
No, I
guess.
remember Abdullah last week
Yeah, yeah.
have
He
said that
he
was an
debunked
absolute
us.
shitter.
He tried it, it didn't work. Next one is high protein diets are harmful to your kidneys. I love how the fitness industry often latches onto one medical study or studies that have been conducted for very specific populations, right? I think we tackled keto a couple weeks ago,
Mm.
and this is very similar, right? Where, people are consuming high protein and it's believed to be very bad for your kidneys because now your kidneys can't process it. It's too much kidney load and so on and so forth. And this is a myth that people actually then tend to avoid high protein food because of this, because they have this belief that has been sold to them or that they've been told by someone. And again, it comes from these clinical guidelines for people with kidney disease, right? It came I think the last study that I looked at was 2003, I think, was kind of around these things, talking about how it's very specific populations, right? It's not a broad stroke where every single person should be watching their protein intake, because then what then happens is if we're eating very little protein, then we're missing a massive and essential macronutrient that our body needs, right? We're missing a lot of other smaller micronutrients that our body also needs. So it's really important to be mindful of these things, that we can't always just hear one thing and think it's for everyone, right? There are four very specific populations. So there's actually no real evidence that it's harmful for everyone, right? Like I said, very specific populations. And we want to make sure that we're getting enough protein, right? Because when we think of protein, especially when you're focusing on fat loss, you're thinking muscle preservation, you're thinking satiety, but we often don't think about what protein does for us, right? It's a building block, right? Amino acids are building blocks that our body needs for almost every process in our body, right? Strengthening our immune systems. Our body's made up of cells, your hair, your skin, your nails. All these things need protein. Your hormones need protein. And so it's really important to make sure that we're eating enough protein. It's not just about, building muscle or preserving muscle. Pete, can you jump to the next slide? So the solution, right? A lot of studies that have been done on protein intake, often on like bodybuilders and very high performing athletes, it's actually been shown that 2.2 grams per kilo is the upper limit. So for example, if someone's 100 kgs, that's 220 grams of protein. However, there's actually no benefit of going much higher than that. And for us, right, we have our targets where we're not tracking and measuring every single ounce of food. For some, maybe you want to and you're able to, but for most people, we're using our hands, right? We have the hand portions where a palm, everyone has a palm, you carry it everywhere you go. And you want to be aiming for, 3 to 4, maybe 5, depending on the targets that we've set for you in terms of your protein intake. on a daily basis, making sure that you're consistent with this, right? So only if you have been told by your doctor, nephrologist, or any other medical specialist that you need to, after some testing and all these things, should you now be conscious and worrying about, okay, maybe this is too much protein. But Pete, have you ever come across anyone that eats too much protein? I haven't.
No, I don't think so. But I think Doreen actually makes a good point in the chat, and she says sort of hydration plays a key role in this, right? Because of course, like if you're hydrated, then your body's going to be working in a sort of smoother way. Just like for anyone out there actually taking creatine, right? Creatine monohydrate or any other variation, like you need to make sure you are sufficiently hydrated in order to sort of not risk any adverse effect. So again, this comes down to the point that, okay, if we have our pillars, right? You've got your training, you've got your steps, you've got your movement, your kind of active lifestyle, you've got your kind of whole foods, protein, hydration is another hugely important aspect. And this is something that even when it comes to fat loss is sometimes forgotten, right? I think in the fat loss process, water is essential within it. And so if you aren't adequately hydrated, then, your body's not anyway going to be functioning in a maximally efficient way. And therefore, it's one of those things that often gets forgotten about. And, just coffee, double espressos is the hydration throughout the day. So yes, Doreen, absolutely, like hydration, crucial aspect to ensure essentially the smoothest running of the body, right? As I'm sure everyone finds, right? If they're training sort of pre-iftar in Ramadan, you're dehydrated. It is tough. It is really, really tough. Performance suffers significantly.
Yeah. Abdullah asked a really good question. He says, we often hear, as you mentioned, 2.2 grams per kilo is sufficient. Is it per kg of body weight or lean mass? We tend to go towards body weight. Why? Because people always miss the mark. Therefore, you end up around the lean mass. So that's that one. And I wanted to mention as well around, some of these studies. So you might be like, oh, I want to read the study. I want to check this. I want to check that. It's also interesting that some of them, there are a lot of controls that aren't necessarily put in place, right? So, for example, which we'll kind of touch on now with the eggs, red meat was deemed to be really bad for you, and this and that and this and that. But some of the studies are actually, there wasn't, a control for people that smoked, right? And so you actually start to see that there is more to just the one thing that they're trying to rule out as the, bad, and we shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. You want to actually have good controls for everything, right? And humans don't necessarily live in a vacuum. We don't live in a test tube. So some of these studies should really be scrutinized, and you should be, kind of really reading into everything else besides just the summary.
And often with these sort of studies, right, especially on the long term, it is very difficult to ensure you are able to gather all of this data, because a lot of the time it's just self-report data, which is unreliable as is. And a lot of them are like causation studies, which I think, or like kind of by association. So as this thing goes up, so does this thing. Therefore, it's that thing that is the problem. Whereas there can be sort of many, many other factors that can affect whatever we're seeing.
And then this is a really popular one around cholesterol, right? Eggs are bad for you because they have cholesterol, and cholesterol is bad. And so we see people limiting or completely eliminating egg yolks due to that fear of increasing cholesterol. And this comes from outdated dietary guidelines from the 70s, linking dietary cholesterol to heart disease. And obviously the typical media oversimplification, which has led to a lot of public fear. And there's dietary cholesterol and fat are very similar in that, we mistake dietary cholesterol for blood cholesterol, and we mistake dietary fat for body fat, right? And these two are different. So dietary fat actually has a minimal impact on blood cholesterol for most people, right? There's nuance there. Eggs can increase HDL, which is the good cholesterol, right? We have HDL, the good cholesterol, LDL, the bad cholesterol. And often when you do blood tests, they'll pinpoint both. And then it's also the ratio, right, of good to bad. stronger drivers of heart disease are actually excess calories, right? So coming back to the calories, right, as we often talk about, it's not just about losing body fat, it's also excess calories that impact your health negatively, right? Food quality and obviously low activity, not moving, being sedentary. These things are much, much stronger drivers than you having your 2 eggs in the morning every single day. So what's the truth? Eggs are nutrient dense, right? We know that eggs are not just high in protein, they have very essential nutrients. We have choline, which is great for the brain, fats, which we know are good for energy and hormone production, B vitamins as well. And cholesterol in itself is actually really good, especially for testosterone production, which obviously men need and also women need, just in different amounts. So the context matters way more than the food itself. What the eggs are consumed with. Are you eating, the eggs with an eggs Benny every morning alongside a big Starbucks, Frappuccino, and then some, all these things are really important to kind of have that context, as opposed to just ruling out the one food. Pete, do you like your eggs Benedict sauce barra? Is that
Yes,
it?
you know it. Got it. You are speaking Arabic, Marvin. Source
Of
of the
course.
sun. So yeah, I mean, sort of the point, like kind of one of the points here is, again, from bodybuilding territory, right? They would always separate the egg yolks from the egg white because the egg white is literally just the protein, right? The yolk has the fat, it has protein in as well, and it has all sorts of other sort of nutrients in there. And so by being able to get rid of the yolk, right, they're able to reduce the calories whilst keeping the protein. So again, like that is something that has sort of fed itself into health culture and diet culture and this kind of stuff. And it's always important to understand like because separating your egg yolks and egg whites is fine, right? But as long as you have a valid justification for doing it. For example, sticking to a calorie target, or I don't know, for taste, or for another reason. But as long as it's a valid reason and not because, oh my God, I'm going to eat too many eggs and it's going to sort of, kill me via cholesterol.
Yeah, but I don't know about you. I would rather, I don't, just a question for you guys. Would you rather take out the egg yolks and have really bland just egg whites, or just maybe not have the avocado with the eggs? Question, food for thought.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Yeah, or just kind of trim it out elsewhere in the day. Reduce maybe instead of one slice of toast, instead of two slices of toast, one. What do we
Yeah.
have? Um, liquid egg white. Yeah, but again, liquid egg whites, it just is horrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've done it before. You put it in a pan and it's just ugh. Like exactly, Doreen. Thank you. Like,
I haven't tried that.
like dieting and sort of eating well, it shouldn't be like really
Boring and bland.
boring, bland, and miserable, right? But that is a lot of the time what is associated with dieting in terms of restriction, and you can't have this and you can't have that, and fear mongering, and these negative associations with food that when you do eat them, you feel guilty for doing so. Um, so a lot of the health foods are kind of well, we get onto that I think in a moment. Um, yes, I eat all of your eggs. Scrambled, poached. It's another version.
Cool show.
Right, number six, we're halfway through. So sugar spikes insulin, and insulin makes you gain fat. So I'm sure, like myself, a lot of you have seen Instagram sort of influencers, fitfluencers, whatever you want to call them, talking about tracking their insulin spikes and trying to basically live a zero insulin spike life. And then what that leads to is avoiding things that can spike your insulin, right? Like fruit and carbohydrate, these sorts of things, right? And insulin is essentially the body's response, when there is an influx of sort of higher blood sugar. And what it then does is it either shuttles the excess blood sugar into either fat cells or muscle cells or the liver for storage, right? And so you can kind of see how this comes about, right? Okay, insulin is released. It's going to put sort of the blood sugar, the excess blood sugar into my fat cells. I don't want that. I don't want to be fat. Right. And this is really a major oversimplification of insulin's role, and also like a misinterpretation of sort of diabetes research. So Marvin, did you by any chance look into sort of particular studies there?
I didn't, but I do remember thinking that's ex the exact same oversimplification. Like, I eat or I eat fruit, I eat carbohydrate, insulin gets released, insulin makes me fat, therefore I'm fat. Like, just
Mm.
it's crazy that that's the wave in which, people start to think. It's like cortisol, right? Like how people think
Literally just about to
cortisol is
say.
bad for you, you shouldn't do this, you can't, always trying to be in this, rest and digest state and no, parasympathetic. Well, if you didn't have cortisol, you would be a zombie. Like the human body needs cortisol to function every
Cortisol is
single.
the thing that wakes you up in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So
just that chronic cortisol can then be a problem, and that can lead to all sorts of other issues. But yeah, so why is it a myth? Insulin is normal. It's an essential hormone. It's not fattening, and it contributes to the homeostasis of the body. So I'm not sure if you remember from biology class back many years ago, most likely. For myself, let's see if I can do it justice. But homeostasis is basically where the body will do certain things to bring itself back into baseline, right? So just like here, at this point, sort of insulin is released, blood sugar goes down, and then at this point, glucagon is released. I think I've got it right there, and that then sort of spikes up. So we ideally want to be in this level, but there is no harm in having something that spikes our insulin up, because then the body is naturally going to bring it back down. I think the sort of thing to watch out for is the quality of food that you're bringing in that is potentially causing the insulin spikes, right? Because if that is high calorie, you've got Marvin's favorite Starbucks Frappuccino in the morning. I feel like you're personally talking about that.
backing
But
me.
you then have your croissant, you then have, I don't know, someone's birthday at work, you have a piece of cake, you have something else. You go home and have something, sort of dessert with friends in the evening or whatever. Like these are consistently high insulin spikes, which are sort of combined with a higher calorie intake, which then leads to the fat gain, right? Not necessarily because of the body's response producing insulin to manage that blood sugar level. As I said, fat gain driven by calorie surplus, not insulin spikes. And mixed meals actually do wonders, like whole foods, proteins, high fiber foods do really well to limit the sort of rapid blood sugar increase. And so by having your eggs in the morning, sort of maybe some, I don't know, some fruit alongside it, some avocado or whatever, that is going to give you a very steady release of energy. So much like we spoke about with our Ramadan protocol, right? At certain points, for example, sahur, you want stuff which is going to be sitting in your digestion for a long period of time, because it's going to keep you fuller for longer and it's going to be releasing energy slowly, rather than something that spikes your blood sugar quickly and then sort of crashes back down. And then obviously you crash, you're hungry, you need more fuel, and then you're fasting and you feel terrible. Been there, done that. What's the solution? Obviously, look at the total calorie intake. This is the thing that determines fat loss. Again, you want to be burning more calories, or your body burning more calories than what you're consuming if the goal is fat loss. And obviously, the reverse is true if you're looking to gain muscle. Protein, fibers, fats, with carbs for this steady, stable energy. And also, like, just no need to fear an increase in blood sugar. It is a perfectly normal part of the body, sort of process within the body. Now, gluten and dairy are inherently harmful and should be avoided. Now, I don't know at what point, at what sort of time, in the 2000s, was it? I guess so, where like gluten started becoming the devil. And this, we see it as, I've gone gluten free, I've cut out bread, I've cut out dairy, without any formal intolerance or diagnosis. Now, there is something to say here that if you are to eat certain foods and you do feel a bloating or you do feel something, then maybe there is an issue with that food you're eating. That could be in terms of the way it's cooked. It could be just it's irritating you in some way. For me, it's uncooked broccoli or beans that doesn't do well with me, so I don't really eat it as much. But if we're talking bread and dairy, Some people are going to be lactose intolerant. So do you look for lactose-free type dairy products? And there's always like a spectrum to this. There's always a scale. And really, we see this as well from, again, just the demonization of foods and saying that this is contributing to you being fat and this is contributing to, your poor health. And people love jumping on these sorts of bandwagons because it's incredibly polarizing. You can be the police when it comes to all things dairy free and gluten free. And so really, unless there's any kind of mild bloating or whatever, it is only 100% necessary to avoid gluten if you have been sort of diagnosed with celiac disease, or this sort of diagnosed sensitivity. Dairy, is well tolerated by a lot of populations, a lot of people, can provide obviously great nutrients within that. And also unnecessary restriction and this demonization of food can reduce the diet quality and also just increase the stress around, what it is I should eat. If I can go to this place, I'm in a supermarket, what do I buy? And it's funny, like, again, to kind of follow the money in some way. I remember when gluten-free wasn't a thing. And I remember then sort of being in my supermarket back home once, and you literally have a whole aisle dedicated to gluten-free products, which all, to be honest, taste, not as good as the original, but the cost associated with something that is gluten-free, for example, is huge. It's hugely more expensive. And so again, it comes down to the point around what is the underlying reason or rationale you are doing a certain thing, right? And so if it is because, yeah, you kind of heard that gluten-free is good and you don't experience any bad negative side effects with eating gluten, then you're probably just paying a lot more for a less tasty product. Also, see someone about it. If you suspect something or if you want to get yourself checked, go for one of these food intolerance tests or see your GP or you'll see your doctor about this kind of thing and only really feel like you can remove foods based on the fact that you have seen a clear intolerance. And Marvin, it may be worth talking sort of briefly just about your experience with the Whole30 diet, because that is a really good way to see what is sort of proving challenging to the body.
Yeah, exactly. I actually want to go through that for myself soon, and it'll be great to kind of walk people through that process. Essentially, what you're doing is you are removing anything that that is a big offender, right? So people know that gluten is now becoming an offender for some people, whether it's bloating, celiac sensitivity, dairy can be another one, all these types of things. So essentially, what you do is you only eat meat, fruit, nuts, seeds, and no pseudo cereals, no cereals. And you do that over a 30-day span, right? And then after 30 days, it's essentially like an elimination diet without having to go through very complex testing and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting because it probably is worthwhile for some people, right? Just because of the learning process as well. Some of the raving reviews you hear from people is, oh man, I actually can eat so much more food than I thought I could, in terms of quality and variety and that type of stuff, right? You expose your body to eggplants and people are having, artichokes and all sorts of things that they would have, ordinarily never really had. Obviously, for those that are insensitive, then you actually see some benefits. So like for myself personally, I've got eczema. And over the years, I've always tried to figure out what's going on, what's happening. I've lived on steroid creams and lo and behold, tried to, cut out dairy for quite a while. I think I did a month, 2 months, and actually felt that there was a significant help there. So for me personally, dairy is a big one, but that may not be the case for everyone, right? So it's individual specific and not necessarily painting everyone with the same brush.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is if you are randomly eating through the course of the day, it's very difficult to attribute bloating or discomfort or whatever it might be to a particular thing, right? Because if you're eating totally different things each day, then you don't really know, how your body is reacting to this. Was it immediately afterwards, or was this from the previous meal this morning? And so if you can bring in that sort of structure and routine to your nutrition, at least for a short period of time, you can then see what is how your body responds, right? And so that for me is how I found with the broccoli, because back then I was in a position where, yeah, vegetables, I'll have them all and this and that. And then I remember there was one day I sort of wouldn't have the broccoli with my meal because I sort of ran out. And I was fine afterwards. And I was like, oh, okay, really? Okay, maybe. But it's going to be healthy, right? And so then, I bought it again and the same thing happened. So it's not just a case of like feeling like you have to live with the discomfort to your digestion, but actually like taking a bit more of a methodical approach on how you can identify what is leading to water retention, bloating, these sorts of things.
Abdullah mentioned a really good point where he says majority of healthy branded food end up just as unhealthy, intriguing paradox. And to add to that, Abdullah, what often then happens is because people think or deem these gluten-free, whatever, all that stuff to be unhealthy, then it's like, they have way more of that than they would just a regular Kit Kat, right? Because this is gluten-free, I can have 10, but if it's a Kit Kat, I'll have one. And so there's like a natural limiting factor when you know that you're eating something that is overly and
Mm.
hyper processed.
Yeah, and Sarah mentioned as well, like dairy is the problem for her. And for me, like it's funny because it's the same, except it's just in milk for some reason. Yogurts, I said take that back, milk and ice cream, but I still have ice cream. I've got lactose-free milk, but the ice cream is still there every now and again. And every time I'm like, why do I do this to myself, really? But we forget. We have goldfish memories, don't we? So you need to avoid all processed foods to be healthy, right? And so this is where you kind of go to one sort of end of the spectrum, right? And you think anything packaged, I need to cut it out, whether that's bread, yogurt, frozen foods, and only trying to eat these sort of deemed clean foods. And a lot of the time, I mean, especially here, I'm sure you've all probably seen things change over the years, right? But it's very difficult if you are picky with your food. Um, what was it? Yeah, when I first came here, I tried to find Greek yogurt, accidentally bought like a pot or a tub of labna, I think it was, and that didn't get eaten at all. But yeah, you kind of have this stress around okay, I need to avoid all of these types of products and only eat these kind of clean, healthy type foods. This then can lead to just overwhelm and it being too much and too much analysis and too much thinking, too much decision making. And as we have spoken many times before, right, we really want to get you away from, the clean eating, food is good versus bad for you type mindset. Because everything, I think is absolutely fine in moderation, right? And that I think is the key aspect here. And some things are going to be better for you reaching your goal than other things. And when you stop, I think, seeing food as having a sort of a negative association attached to it, that then is where you really start improving the relationship you have with food. And I mean, it takes a time to undo that because it's years and years and years of programming, and it's still very much in your face every day, as we say here with social media. And also, there is a confusion between, packaged foods, maybe minimally processed foods, and these heavily ultra processed foods too. And really, I think in the world that we live in, right, we need stuff, like stuff can't always be consumed straight away, right? Processed foods generally have a bit of a longer shelf life, which can be very useful, maybe less of a cost attached to them. Um, and I think this is one of Marvin's favorite statements as well, like the dose makes the poison too. So you can always have something in moderation. Just because you have it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, right? It's how it fits within every day. And, when we talk about having this kind of like 80-20 rule to sort of nutrition, where 80% is, good quality, whole type nutritious foods, and the 20% can be left for fun, right? Whatever that may look like for you. And so again, foods really have no like objective morality to them. There's no good, there's no bad. I would just say they're either probably going to get you closer to where you want to be or keep you the same or take you away. We spoke about the whole foods approach and minimally processed foods can really make life a little bit easier for you and not have to make you go to the grocery store every 5 minutes to top up.
Yeah, something that I found to be really helpful with this good versus bad food sort of, way of thinking is, if you think of food as, like Pete said, it's getting you closer to your goals, or maybe some is not getting you as close to your goals. So when you think of, when you're going out for food with friends or family or whatever the case may be, in as much as, yes, there are a plethora of ways which we could connect with our friends and family, but sometimes it is food, it's over food, right? And so it's okay, right? The purpose of the food that I'm eating in this moment is not so that I can be whatever X% body fat. It's so that I can connect with my friends, connect with my family, be out, be social. And so having that mindset has really helped me to stop thinking, oh man, I can't have this. Oh, the pancakes here. Ah, this is bad. And then that guilt that you then end up associating these types of foods with.
And I think that, Abdullah, I'm not quite sure what you're saying easier said than done around, but I imagine that's probably um, sort of breaking the relationship or the negative relationship with some sort of food. And yeah, this absolutely takes time. I think for me, having been so strict with my diet back in my 20s, calorie counting everything, yes, it gave me a great view of what was in food, but it took a lot of time to just be able to eat normally without kind of panicking around what's in this, what's in that. Oh my God, I can't track this. I'm not going to have it. I'm going to avoid this social occasion. And whilst like each method has its benefits, ultimately we all want to get to a place where we can eat intuitively, right? We know what our body needs. We know kind of, roughly what is sort of the varying different nutrients in these sorts of food. And we want to be able to go to any occasion and feel comfortable and confident with what we're choosing. And in order to get there, right, we need to go into those moments where we're going to be uncomfortable and we're going to be exposing ourselves to these emotions and these things. And that is why it's so important, when we chat with you and we go through your food journal to understand kind of what happened, what went on, what led to this, what were you thinking, how can we combat that, or how can we overcome that situation from happening again the next time. So number 9, nearly there. Don't worry. You need to cut. You need to completely cut out sugar to be healthy. And this is where we kind of think about the amount of times actually I've had calls and people have said, I've got no sugar, no carbs, no fat, and no this. And ultimately, it doesn't work, right? Yes, you may lose some weight to begin with, right? But in the long term, totally unsustainable unless you are going to be super restrictive and you can be of that kind of compulsive mindset, which then again has other sort of questions attached to it. But having this like on off kind of relationship with certain foods only is going to lead to these occasions where you have like a binging episode. And you can't just have one scoop, you have 10, you finish the thing. And again, like this is something that I kind of deal with when it comes to life after being super restrictive and tight with food. It's like I know that if I have one bite, I'm going to finish the whole thing. So, I don't go there unless, I've kind of factored it in and I'm cool doing so, right? It's giving the power to you to understand that foods are sort of fuel and you can sort of use different amounts to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve ultimately. Again, sugar is very much demonized as well in the media and again, the social media space. So sugar can really fit into a healthy diet. And, for me, I use it in a way where I see it as fuel, right? So, for example, on my Friday morning runs, 6 o'clock in the morning, if I'm going out like in my pre-half marathon prep and I was going to run like a 15K, a 16 and 18K, right? Damn right, I'm going to need some sugar for that. Like you need that easily digestible, immediate fuel type energy, right? So we talk about it a lot where like carbohydrate, slash sugar is fuel. So if you're moving, if you're doing stuff, if you're training, then it can be a really positive thing for you. Equally, if you factor it in your day as part of like your free meal or occasion where you're balancing things in the day, absolutely fine. And again, like it comes down to this point around extreme restriction is not going to be sustainable in the long term. It's much better to understand how you can use it or consume it or when you can, because then that leads to a sort of a healthy approach to food. So again, 80-20 rule is always good, and include these high sugar foods intentionally, whether it's a special occasion, a birthday, for your free meal, aligned with sport, not just as a kind of grazing sort of thing that you would do during the day mindlessly. And last of all, artificial sweeteners are worse than sugar. Now, um, this kind of leads to avoiding diet drinks, low calorie options due to this fear of weight gain or sort of damage to your health. And again, going back to the like observational studies that we have seen, right? They would find people who drank a higher amount of diet drinks would gain weight, right? But it's not necessarily the diet drinks that are doing that. It is what is being consumed, outside of that. I'm sure everyone's heard of the meme where it's like someone lists off some crazy order from McDonald's, and then they'll be like, and a Diet Coke. It's the calories that are coming in, not necessarily the actual sweetener that is happening there. And again, sort of evidence-wise, there is no strong evidence that shows that sweeteners cause fat gain. And having, myself got down to very, very, very low body fat and controlled and counted every calorie that was coming in, diet drinks, diet Coke, diet whatever would be a really powerful way to cater to those cravings, right? To get that sweetness without the calories. And so it can be a really useful tool when you are going through such a fat loss phase to manage these cravings. And also, that's not to say you should have a Diet Coke with every meal. Hydration, super important. Water first, but don't fear these 0-calorie drinks if you feel they can help you and support you through. Oh, good session. How are we
Good.
doing? How are the questions looking in the chat?
Yeah, Abdullah asked or mentioned a really good point that him and I think actually spoke about not too long ago on our call, where he says eating intuitively has to be earned, right? Maybe not the healthiest of ways to believe, but the discipline in eating has indeed helped me personally to achieve better results. And so this is a really good point, right? It's like if you think of someone that works using their hands, right? Like a mechanic, they initially have to do some training, right? Whether that's through the theory work that they have to understand the machine that they're working with, or the actual practical of using and working on these machines countless times over and over again up until it becomes innate, second nature, where they don't have to turn back to the manual or turn back to their theory book or ask so and so. Of course, they will come across times where they need to. But so essentially, they're going from having to learn every little bit and piece versus now at the end where it's now more intuitive because they've done it, 10,000 times. So the same goes for here, right? Where yes, intuitive eating has to be earned. You can't intuitively eat your way into, better health, because if that were the case, then you would be at the place where you want to be, right? You would be at X% body fat. You would be at X goal, but it didn't work for you, right? And so you need to strip it back, learn the skills, learn the habits, whether that's through portion size servings with your hands or with calorie counting, up until you get to that point, and then very slowly can then intuitively eat from a point of knowledge and not from a free for all, if you will.
For sure, for sure. I think we've got some more questions coming in here. Amani, what about protein water instead of diet or zero sugar soft drinks? To be honest, I've tried a protein water before and I found it tasted horrible, but I'm sure that was probably just the brand. So again, it comes down to, okay, are you struggling with your protein intake? If then you are kind of using these sorts of supplements to make up for what you could be getting in whole foods, then that's another question to think about. And yeah, like for me anyway, personally, I'd much rather eat my protein because it's going to fill me up rather than sort of drink it, and it may or may not be effective based on the actual protein which is used, right? Because a lot of these protein bars or sort of these types of sort of protein products, water, whatever, they have like a lower quality protein in. Again, like they want to cut cost potentially on the product. And so what do they use? They may use a good amount of a good sort of quality protein, but then the bulk of it is just kind of like the lower grade stuff, but it still says 20 grams per serving. So that I think is something to think about. And if you are struggling with, your protein intake, then yes, it could be a good option.
Yeah, I would also ask then the point you mentioned about it's the quality of protein, but then also the quality of everything else in there, right? So now you start to kind of be mindful of, if you can have a 20-gram protein water or protein bar, you can probably have three of those in one sitting. And so now the calories are in excess of what you would have done had you eaten, like Pete said, where you're more satiated, right? So food for thought there.
Yeah, and what else is in there? Is there sugar? Is there this? Is there that? Are there things, not because sugar is bad, but is it going to sort of unknowingly accumulate the calories? Now, Reem has said oats and granola with Greek yogurt is actually the worst thing you can eat and is a really bad breakfast. Someone at work said oats are originally horse food and has too much fiber. Should one be full after each? Okay, we'll start with that first one. So I remember there's this really funny like meme, and it's like someone saying, again, supermarket, right? Oats, like they're poison for your body. No one should be eating oats, blah, 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 blah. And then it cuts to like freaking Kipchoge, right? Someone who broke the marathon record, I think it was, fastest man on the planet for the marathon. And someone asked him, what did you eat for breakfast? And he's like, oats. So, it's one of these things where, I mean, for me, every day I've had oats for God knows, like 18 years or something. Greek yogurt, granola, a little bit of granola, some protein shake in there, and that's my breakfast. That's my go-to breakfast with some fruit on top. And so when you have these sorts of things, right, I would always suggest to you to ask the person, why? Why is it the worst thing? And I mean, 10 times out of 10, they're not going to be able to give you a good answer. And for someone to say, yeah, they're originally horse food and, have too much fiber, there's sort of ways, obviously, then to cook the oats. It depends what oats you're buying. Are you soaking them? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And so there's so many different sort of questions to ask off of this. And yeah, whenever you come up like with things like this, whether it's squats are bad for you, your knee should never go over your toes, blah 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 blah. If no one can give you a proper answer, they're wrong. Also, anyone talking in absolutes is wrong. Everything is it depends. So that is what I suggest going there. Marvin, anything to add there?
I was about to say the exact same thing. It depends. And then my next question would be, how much is too much fiber? And then the person answers, and then if they can, and then you ask why. Like you could just keep going down that sort of equation.
And
Should
nine
one be?
times out of 10, it's because they've seen a TikTok, which has
Yeah,
said,
yeah, exactly.
people get their
Question
numbers
around being full after each meal or not. That's a really good question. If you're in a calorie deficit, you should genuinely feel hungry at some point, right? You can't, yes, you can do things to help, bulk up your meal so that can help with the hunger levels. But there's a genuine level of hunger that you should feel because you're not giving your body, the amount of calories it needs to maintain weight or to gain weight. You're trying to lose body fat, right? And so there should definitely be a sense of like, oh, I'm full. Something I've used a lot in the past is to try and be 80% full. Obviously hard to quantify, but it just makes you feel comfortable, right? There's no need to feel stuffed and bloated and that type of stuff. So a good one there. Free meals, we do believe in, very important. As Pete said, all these sugary foods and ultra processed foods have a role in your nutrition on a weekly basis.
And the thing I say to everyone is, ultimately the thing that is going to get you to where you want to be is consistency. And if that means throwing in a free meal once a week, fine. There's the social element, enjoying life, enjoying food, not feeling restricted. And so really, like free meals come in, maybe at the weekend or during the week or whatever the occasion is, as long as you haven't had 10 other free meals during the week, right? And this is kind of something that we see a lot is the 80-20 again, right? 80% of the time you have to be on it. Any less and you're going to not get to where you want to be. Fat loss is literally purely nutrition. That is the main thing. Frozen chicken strips, Marvin.
Yeah, questions. Again,
Yes.
it depends, right? So are you having the frozen chicken strips because you need something quick and you aren't able to cook and you're strapped on time and all these things? Yes, it's fine. Could you potentially, get chicken by yourself that you then cook, that you still put in the air fryer? If you could, then are you just trying to cut a corner? You know, it is processed because there's more that has been done to it, but there's a time and a place for it, right?
Are the chicken strips breaded as well?
Yeah,
Because then it's going
exactly.
to add a little bit more carbohydrate. For me, what
Yeah.
I do is there's this really great app. I've talked about it before. I think it's AFC, Arabian Food, Arabian Gourmet Food, or something like that. And they will deliver like 3 kilos of chicken frozen, right? And literally every 2 days, I will take out 8 breasts and let them defrost in the freezer, and they're ready to put in the air fryer. So it's convenience, right? If you are worried, if you're throwing away chicken breast that has gone off in the fridge, not ideal. So, these sorts of things can come into play. Regular cow milk, Marvin.
Yeah, perfectly fine as long as you don't have any struggle with dairy or anything like that, because it has a lot of there's a lot of nutrients, right? It's not just the protein. It's actually one of the few foods, if you look at the macronutrient breakdown, that has almost equal carb, fat, protein ratio. And of course, everything else that comes with it, the calcium, the vitamins, all sorts. So yeah, it can, unless if you are intolerant.
And the proper amount of carbohydrate for each meal, it really depends.
Yep.
Depends on goal, how much you're moving, what's your training like, um, what's happening with the other meals during the day, these sorts of things. So it's difficult to say, but we'll kind of come back to you on your food journal to sort of allow it to give a bit more context. And I think last one before everyone has to go to bed, is there an upper limit intake for protein per meal? Um, I don't know. Have you seen sort of recent research on this? For me, I know that people have said, oh, you can only digest 25 grams of protein per meal or 40 grams of protein per meal. But then the question is, okay, like you don't eat the protein and then al all it is digested, right? There's a process to that. And so the protein is going to be broken down and released through this process. And that's not like, okay, body has had meal. I've now got 25 grams of protein. I can't use the rest. There's so much more nuance to this. So as long as you're not getting 200 grams of protein per day from one meal, questions are probably going to be asked at that point. But, I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. For me, 3 chicken breasts for my evening meal is kind of what I've been doing for years, to be honest, because I like to feel full, along with the peppers and the carrots and whatever else I have with it.
Nice. Abdullah,
All
I
right.
used to work in a supplement shop, and I used to sell people on the fact that you can only digest 20 grams at a time. Therefore, you must do 3 to 4 shakes spread out so that people could come back and buy more. So it's no, there isn't necessarily an upper limit, but like Pete said, like if you're then going and having 100, 200 grams of protein in one sitting, we have more questions to ask there.
I think Marvin's making up for a past life now.
Exactly.
Well, everyone, you've been amazing. Thank you once again for joining. We'll let you know what the next one is about. If there's any questions at all that you haven't been able to share in this, please put them into your groups. And honestly, the turnout to these is amazing. The questions are amazing. The feedback you're sharing as well is fantastic. So onwards and upwards we go. We'll let you know what we're doing next time around as well. Thank you.